Asian Americans signing on to be used as tools of white supremacy to dismantle affirmative action did nothing to address the discrimination faced by Asian Americans in college admissions.
A school does not want to admit me because I'm Asian American, then there's not much I can do about that because it's a part of me that I just can't get rid of.
Your anti-blackness is kicking your ass.
Edward Bloom wanted Asian Americans to blame black people for their not getting into college, and Edward Bloom and the Supreme Court want black people to blame Asian Americans for affirmative action being banned.
Yeah, we told you so. Overturning affirmative action wouldn't help you guys. And in fact, it hurts you guys.
I was a straight A high school student, top of my class, played violin, was treasurer, president of like 3 different clubs, all the typical Asian stuff. And Harvard still rejected my ass.
You thought removing black people would make all this easier. All it did was show you they weren't holding you back. They just weren't planning to let you in either. So I want to ask y'all, do you think this was a miscalculation by people who wanted to get rid of this? And now they're waking up to realizing who was actually on their side? Because I know I don't think folks are waking up at all. And if anything, they're still confused about how come I didn't get in?
There are communities of color who went to the Supreme Court who decided that what impacted black people would not impact them in the same way.
If only black people had tried to warn us. Oh wait, they did.
Asian Americans were weaponized against Black Americans. They were tricked into supporting the dismantling of affirmative action. They were told a lie that affirmative action was hurting them, that it favored Black students, and that eliminating it would increase the admission rates into America's elite Ivy League universities. But here is what actually happened, and it shocked them. Affirmative action wasn't only benefiting Black Americans, it was benefiting them too. And when they helped tear it down, Asian American admission rates dropped. Now many of them are out there complaining, regretting their decision, realizing they were played. They fought to destroy a system that was actually working for them, all because they believed in a story that was designed to divide them from Black Americans, their natural allies. So today, I'm gonna show you how this actually happened. We're gonna first watch these clips. This video is for educational purpose.
A lot of people really thought getting rid of affirmative action was going to give them more opportunities. If you move more black people out of the way, suddenly you the next person in line. No, that's not how this works. What you fail to understand is this. Black Americans weren't just in the race. We were the ones fighting to make sure that the race was fair in the first place. That wasn't competition. That was infrastructure. It's like seeing somebody hold a ladder steady and you kick it thinking you about to climb faster. Now the ladder gone and everybody on the ground.
They fell for divide and conquer tactics, and they aligned with whiteness, and they blamed black people for their not getting into college. Something I'll touch upon, as long as we do understand that a lot of Asian Americans like myself are aware of this and it doesn't change our support of affirmative action. Research has indicated that if college admissions was based purely on GPA and standardized test score, then enrollment among Asian Americans would increase slightly, but we're talking about tenths of a percent. And it's also indicated that the 12% or so of Asian Americans currently enrolled in college who did benefit from affirmative action under such a system would likely lose their seats, and they tend to be Asian Americans who come from lower income families. On a purely personal note, when I was applying to the University of Michigan in the 1990s, it was generally thought that being Asian American is a disadvantage in college admissions. And what my dad told me is that since I am a first generation born Asian American, I have a lot of privilege. I was born and raised in a country that was stolen from Native Americans, that was built off the free labor of enslaved black people. Furthermore, I'm not the descendant of a railroad Chinese. I am not the descendant of a Japanese American who was interned during World War II. And at that time, we thought that I was not the descendant of anybody who was negatively impacted by the Chinese Exclusion Act. It turns out that wasn't true. But what my dad said was, if the University of Michigan is going to remove a quarter point from your application because you're Asian American, and that is necessary in order to redress historical harm done to black people and Native Americans, then so be it. And what the stereotypical Asian hard work ethic meant in my household is you just need to work that much harder to make up for that quarter point. And what you don't do is you do not blame the people who have historically been harmed. What you do is you work hard to change the system. So I am disappointed in my fellow Asian Americans who don't seem to understand that. Dismantling affirmative action didn't address the fact that selective colleges admit Asian American applicants at a rate 28% less than similarly qualified white applicants. It's almost like the discrimination faced by Asian Americans in college admissions never had anything to do with black students or affirmative action, and had everything to do with legacy admissions and the choices that colleges make to discriminate against Asian Americans in order to give preferential treatment to lesser qualified white students.
On Instagram, the New York Times promoted this piece about how Asian Americans feel like they have to hide their Asianness in order to get into elite colleges. This stems from a lawsuit alleging that Harvard discriminated against Asians. The lawsuit was funded by a white conservative. As an Asian Latina, I want to know, what is the goal here? Like, if you get what you want and race isn't considered in admissions, what makes you think places like Harvard are going to pick you over white people, over legacies, over athletics? So many of us are taught that this minority myth benefits us. Like, if we work hard, keep our head down, just make good grades, be the top of everything, like, of course we're going to get the best things in society, including the best schools. Research shows affirmative action benefits white women the most. So what makes you think getting rid of it will benefit us Asians? But I went to another college and moved on with life. Do you think white politicians and CEOs and everyone else in power got there because they made the best grades? Be for real.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm still pissed about those Asian Americans who helped that white man get rid of affirmative action. And it didn't even benefit us in the end. Unsurprisingly. So I need Asian Americans to remember that none of this was ever built for us. The lawsuit that ended affirmative action was not started by Asian Americans. It was led by Edward Bloom, a white conservative activist who has spent years just trying to dismantle civil rights protections because that's the type of person he is. He created Students for Fair Admissions and specifically recruited Asian American plaintiffs to frame this narrative as Harvard discriminates against Asians, but this was never about helping us. It was about using us, as always. About using us to attack policies designed to create equity and level the playing field. Now, you have probably seen a lot of people saying that affirmative action lowers the bar. Oh, DEI also lowers the bar. They're not the same thing, but people think they are. That is so misleading, and it's rooted in anti-blackness. Also, are we noticing the percentage of white people admitted and the overwhelmingly white legacy admissions at these institutions is something that specifically never gets touched in this conversation? Why is that? Is it clicking? So here's some facts from the case. So Asian students did have the highest GPAs and test scores, but got rated lower on personal qualities by the admissions officers. And for identical profiles, Asian applicants had a 25% chance of getting in, while black applicants had a 95% chance. And that stat gets weaponized to imply that black students are less qualified, but affirmative action isn't lowering the standard. It's about addressing systemic inequities caused by racist policies like housing discrimination, segregated schools, and the wealth gap, etc. This is classic model minority propaganda portraying Asian Americans as proof that racism is over to justify attacking other communities. That is exactly why they ended the immigration ban against Asians in the US and then only allowed in high-achieving Asians from Asia, scientists, doctors, etc., to come to the US so that they could use us to prove that they weren't racist to black people during the Cold War. I need you to pay attention to historical context about how this has all gone down. History is rhyming. It's the same thing. Here's the thing. I want to say that 69% of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action, and advocacy groups like Chinese for Affirmative Action and CIRAC fought to keep it. The loudest anti-affirmative action voices do not represent all of the Asian community. They do represent a narrative designed to divide us, though. And for Asian Americans, especially young Asian Americans, I need you to hear me. Even though many in our community do not align with the model minority nonsense, I can attest to that being true, the ones who do are often the ones that get the most visibility because playing that role perpetuates white supremacy. And at the end of the day, we have to be real about all of this. None of this was ever for us anyways. This country literally had laws banning us from being here. We have always been seen as outsiders. We have only ever been used as a tool, a wedge to uphold white supremacy, and then they will scapegoat us the second they need to. That has always happened in times of sickness, war, and a loss of jobs. And it is on us to disrupt that role, to stop aligning with anti-blackness, and to refuse to be used as puppets for systems that were never built for us anyway. It is imperative that we, as Asian Americans, learn our history, learn how we've been used, understand it, and choose solidarity. Because if we're not fighting these systems together, we are always on the chopping block. Remember how they treated us during COVID.
Black people were like, oh, don't touch affirmative action. It doesn't just impact black people. Remember, laws that impacted black people trickled into impacting other communities of color. And affirmative action was one of them. Remember when we were talking about that last year? And then they gutted affirmative action on behalf of those who are from a community of color but chose to side with white supremacy because they felt like since they weren't black, it wasn't going to impact them the same way. Remember that? Post-affirmative action, Asian American families are more stressed than ever about college admissions. The Reconstruction Amendments came to be and how they impact communities of color today because of the fight for black people. Other communities of color now benefit from those same amendments, those same laws that our ancestors fought for. People in this country, especially communities of color, are going to learn that when you decide that you are not like black people or you are better than those black people, understand that white supremacy doesn't care, because there's going to always be a moment where they turn around and say, you are not white. You do not benefit. Just because you are not black, we hate them over there. But just so you know, we hate you too. Understand, there's real anti-blackness deeply rooted in this country. And when you decide as a person of color or a community of color that you want to disenfranchise black people because the majority culture makes it okay to disenfranchise black people, understand when they can no longer disenfranchise black people, they come after you next.
There was a reason why affirmative action was put into place, but you said that affirmative action discriminates against Asian Americans. In the very first class at Yale University, after the Supreme Court said that affirmative action was unconstitutional, we saw a decrease in the Asian American population. But you know which group saw an increase? You got it. The white population increased to 46%, and the Asian population decreased from 30% to 24%, while the black population stayed the same with Hispanics, although there was a slight increase. Let this be yet another lesson. Don't go against your own interest. You were willing to be the face and the lapdog for white conservatives who were against affirmative action, and in the end, in this case, it backfired on your racial group, not against black people and Hispanics who you thought were benefiting unfairly and disproportionately.
A lot of Asian Americans had filed lawsuits against schools saying that they did not get in because of their race, because their spot was given to a black student because of affirmative action, not even realizing that you too, as a minority, benefit from affirmative action. But in their head, they're European American, okay? They think that they're not a minority. But now we see with the first, I'm sure more stats are going to come out, but in the case of Yale, at the very least, it shows that while y'all were discrediting black students for getting into schools, from their hard work, not because of affirmative action, y'all were really the ones who were needing affirmative action. Okay, y'all probably took some spots from black kids because these schools were trying to meet quotas to, get y'all in. But we know in the case of Yale, black students earned their spot. And I love this for them. I love this for them because y'all wanted affirmative action to be, overturned so bad. And now look at the numbers. It's just so funny to me, like how these people come into black communities and want our black dollars and want to profit off of us, but this is really how they feel about us.
Asian Americans are being used as a wedge against other communities of color. The Harvard Asian American Association and the Asian Alumni Association are both pro-affirmative action. Harvard cannot create a campus that is diverse enough to fulfill its educational mission without considering race as just one factor among many factors. I mean, we've seen massive declines in minority admissions at universities when affirmative action is eliminated. And higher education and these institutions are pipelines to leadership in our society, a society that's still, unfortunately, far from equal and just, one that still has a lot of work to do to close racial disparities and combat systemic racism, one that all of that became painfully clear for this nation with the Black Lives Matter movement. There are racial disparities in education going back centuries in this country, and today, if you're Black, you are more likely to be in an under-resourced school, but also more likely to be viewed as having less academic potential.
So now that we've teamed up and worked together to sort of, finally strike down this affirmative action that was keeping our well-performing Asian students out of these Ivy League schools, we're finally going to see more of us in those schools, right? Right? Sorry, pal. I think we're actually just going to sneak in a few more legacies. But it was nice working with you, though. Oh.
I love when people get what they want after blaming it on black folks and it backfired on them, right? I remember when this first happened. Black folks told y'all this shit was a fucking joke. Affirmative action is a joke, and why y'all pointing the finger at us? We ain't do shit to y'all. But I guess they don't understand how it works. That shit just means, like, let's say if you got a basketball team, right? But you know you gotta pick up one of these people, but they sorry, and it's like you pick them up because you have to. That's how affirmative action works, right? So now you don't have to do that no more. You just let the door open for them to bring more of their people in because you want to cry and blame it on us. We know how they get down.
So Yale, Princeton, and Duke have been threatened with a lawsuit over the decline in Asian American enrollment since the removal of affirmative action.
So I wasn't going to talk about this at first, but since we are on the subject, I need to tell you what an Asian American mom said to me last year about my black child and getting into school, because it was crazy. It was outrageous. So I want to share this story. I was speaking to her. It was an Asian American mom, a white mom, and myself, the black American mom. And I was talking about my child that was applying to a school that was, fairly difficult to get into. And I expressed how, I was a little bit nervous and I just hoped that my child would get in. The Asian American mom interrupts me and says, "You don't have to worry about things like that like I do because your kids are black. They're going to get picked regardless. We're Asian, so, we're actually going to have to work harder to get accepted. We're going to have to work. My kids are going to have to work hard. They're just not going to get accepted like your kids are going to get accepted." This is what she said to me. Oh, my God. And she went on to say that this was due to affirmative action. So, of course, I had to school her. But now that the numbers are out, I wonder what she's thinking. Because just as this wonderful creator has pointed out, the Asian enrollment, once affirmative action was removed, dropped at Duke, Yale, and Princeton. However, black enrollment remained consistent. Look at that. Look at that. And for further context, my child and her child are in the same class, and I do not like comparing children. It's not a good habit because you don't want to judge a fish on how well that they can climb a mountain. Everyone has their own strengths, but just for context of this conversation, please understand that my child and her child share a class. And when it comes to being the top student in the class, the academically strong student in the class, that's my child's black job. Okay, so it was very strange to me that she would try to suggest that when it came to meritocracy, that it would matter for her child, but not for mine, as if mine can't perform, as if low-key, high-key, she was calling my kid stupid. Low-key, high-key saying my child is not deserving and they're just going to automatically get in wherever I apply because of the color of their skin, because that's the only reason why we would be accepted. Why would anybody ever want us to be a part of their school or their community or contribute to the conversation in any way other than because they had to adhere to these rules of affirmative action? It is so rude. It is so ridiculous. It is doing the work of white supremacists. And look what happened here. Look what happened. Look what happened. I truly wonder if she's seen the studies and the results. I wonder. I don't know. Maybe I'll ask her at school pickup tomorrow.
To understand why Asian Americans who opposed affirmative action were wrong, we need to go back to the beginning. Affirmative action did not appear out of nowhere. It was born when the government finally acknowledged that segregation and systemic discrimination against Black Americans had created deep inequalities that wouldn't disappear on their own. In the early 1960s, President Kennedy recognized this reality and declared that the government should take affirmative action to address the ongoing inequality and discrimination that Black Americans still experienced. President Johnson expanded this vision dramatically. In 1965, he gave a famous speech that captured why this was necessary. He said, "You do not take a person who has been hobbled by chains, beat him, bring him up to the starting line, and tell him that he is free to race against all others and still just believe that you have been completely fair." This wasn't about giving Black people an unfair advantage. It was about acknowledging that after centuries of brutal oppression, simply saying that now everyone is equal does not actually create equality. That was the entire logic behind affirmative action. President Nixon set up the first specific federal guidelines to implement affirmative action policies. When affirmative action was first implemented, many organizations used quotas, setting aside a certain number of positions for racial and ethnic minorities and women. Quotas were controversial. White Americans who felt disadvantaged loudly complained, claiming they were being discriminated against. And from those complaints arose an argument that would echo for decades. Affirmative action was reverse discrimination against whites. So here is where Asian Americans who supported dismantling affirmative action made their own critical error. They were told a story. Affirmative action is hurting you. Black people are getting sports that should be yours. You are being discriminated against too. You are a minority. Join us fighting this injustice. That was the lies that these Asian Americans were told. It was a powerful, emotionally compelling story. And it was fundamentally misleading because the actual data tells a completely different story. After affirmative action was ended in 2023, the people who supported dismantling it claimed it would help Asian Americans. They said, remove this policy and more of our students would get admitted into the elite universities in America. But this is not what happened. Asian American admission rates dropped. Instead of increasing, they fell. The entire idea was based on false premise. Meanwhile, what happened to white students? Their admission rates remained relatively stable. This data reveals the truth. Affirmative action was not a zero-sum game where Black gains meant Asian losses. It was a system that benefited multiple underrepresented groups simultaneously while preventing any single dominant group from capturing all spots. Affirmative action was actually helping Asian Americans too, delivering benefits they didn't fully recognize. Asian Americans who supported dismantling affirmative action made a devastating strategic error. They allowed themselves to be divided from Black Americans, their natural allies in fighting systemic inequality, by accepting narratives that pitted them against each other. This is how divide and conquer works. Dominant groups convince subordinated groups to turn against each other, while sitting back and benefiting from the chaos by supporting the elimination of affirmative action. Asian Americans did not help themselves. They helped white students. White admission rates increased. Asian American rates decreased. The group that benefited most from colorblind system was the group that has always benefited from American institutions. This story of Asian Americans dismantling affirmative action matters because it shows how marginalized communities can be turned against each other by using selective data and emotional manipulation. So my message to y'all members of marginalized groups in America: when someone stars you, they are taking your opportunities. Let's fight together to eliminate policies that protect them. You need to ask harder questions. You need to ask whether those protections don't really protect you, because sometimes you might also be under those same protections that you want to get rid of. And you also need to ask yourself, why are these people even seem to be interested in me working with them? Who does this benefit? Does it really benefit me, or is it really just benefit them? Because I guess if these Asian Americans had a vision and see the main idea behind this initiative of dismantling these affirmative actions, they wouldn't have made this critical error. Now, I want you all to tell me what you think about these Asian Americans who are now complaining that they are not being admitted into these Ivy League universities in America. They get rid of affirmative action, now they are complaining. What do y'all think? Let me know down there in the comment section. If you have enjoyed watching this one, please click on that like button. And those viewers who have not yet subscribed, consider hitting on that subscribe button. Mr. TA, your African brother, signing off. Ciao.